Hello. Today we are going to talk about coffee. So today is a little bit of a history lesson on coffee. We've got a couple of things on the counter that you probably were not expecting to see in a coffee video from Bridge Coffee Company, but it does share in the story with Bridge Coffee Company. I'm going to take you a few years back. About 800 years ago, that's it, 800 years ago, there was a goat herder by the name of Caldi who noticed that his goats were eating this bright red cherry on a bush, and the goats were a little more excited. They had a little bit of spunk to them. Well, that cherry was a coffee cherry, and the cherry itself had a pretty good amount of caffeine in it. But inside that was two halves of a seed, and the two halves of the seed were discarded and they ate the fruit. Well, they had discarded all of the seeds into a pile, and they set that pile on fire, and there was a pleasing aroma. And that was the first roasted coffee. The first roasted coffee was just that. It was the discarded heap of seeds that people didn't want. They wanted the fruit, and somebody said, hey, that actually smells kind of good. I wonder if I can use it. And so they started roasting coffee in a wok-like device, and that bore a new way of consuming coffee. So the fruit on the coffee, it goes bad pretty quickly. It starts to ferment pretty fast. And so once you pick it, it's time to eat it. And the coffee seed, as a green seed, it'll last a pretty significant amount of time. In fact, coffee today is stored in warehouses, and new crop coffee is anything that's fresh up to about a year, and then past crop and old crop coffee going back 2-3 years in the warehouse, and it slowly starts to degrade over time. It loses some of its intensity, but it does last a fair amount of time. Where the fruit only lasts a couple of days, you can get a couple of years out of a seed. And when you roast it, then you've got an immediate amount of consumption. So the first coffee shop dates back to 1475, and that was in Constantinople. Another trivial fact, the Lloyd's of London was started in a coffee shop in the 1600s. So people were roasting coffee, and that allowed the coffee shop to form, and people were gathering around a cup of coffee. I am enjoying my cup of coffee right now. And in the 1800s, a family by the name by the Folgers started roasting coffee, and it became much more widely available, and for the most part it's what most people understand coffee to be. So like this Folgers red tin of coffee, it's now plastic, but it came in a red tin can, was a packaged and ready to brew roasted coffee that, because of the packaging, was able to last a little bit longer. And the roasted ground coffee then was easy to be consumed. Now, the coffee that's in here is on a grading scale of mediocre quality. I'm not going to judge it that way. It's just by the scale that it's measured. And this is what people get introduced to for coffee. Now, I'll tell you that that coffee happens to have two types of coffee seeds in it. There's an Arabica seed, this is an Arabica seed, and then there is a Robusta. A Robusta is widely grown at lower elevations and easy to grow. It's why it's called Robusta, and it has a tremendous amount of caffeine in it. Well, caffeine is a bittering agent. And so most people, when they have their first cup of coffee, they think, oh man, that's super bitter and it's not enjoyable. So they add cream and sugar to it. I am not a coffee snob. If you want to add cream and sugar to your coffee, that's quite all right with me. I like a latte as well. But that bitter Robusta and a bit of Arabica was a coffee that became widely available. And classic. That's just a really great way to describe it. And then the Italians and the French, they were doing coffee a little bit differently. They were using mostly Arabica coffee and roasted to a little bit darker than what our Folgers was. And it had a little more boldness to it. And the machines that they were using allowed a rapid extraction. So an espresso machine with a little bit darker roasted coffee from the French and Italians bore what Americans called specialty coffee. That's not entirely true, but that's just kind of how it's known. Specialty coffee is a definitive quality on that scale standard, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit later. So what Americans thought was this light roasted coffee equated mediocre quality, and the dark roasted coffee from the Italians and French became specialty coffee or good coffee or quality coffee. The light and dark equated to those two concepts. And it's one of those things that I wanted to really drive today, is that the preconceived notion that light is diner coffee and dark is specialty coffee, I want to squash that. We're gonna correct that train of thought. In the middle is coffee that I've roasted, and it is a amazing coffee from Mexico. So this particular coffee happens to be the lightest of the three, and I can tell you it is specialty grade coffee, meaning it has scored a value of 80 points or higher and has gone through a critical evaluation for defect. And so the coffee, before it's even roasted, when it's just in a tray like this in green, it gets thoroughly inspected for faults and defects. And then when it's roasted and brewed under controlling very tight controls, the taste of the coffee is then evaluated on the perceived intensity and quality. And there's a job out there called a licensed Q grader that is for that specifically. So I ground that coffee, and you can see it is significantly lighter than the diner coffee or the tin that you might have at home, and the dark specialty coffee that you may have gotten introduced to espresso-based drinks. Why is it so light? Well, I can tell you it is fully developed, meaning that the roast profile on this has allowed the sugars to become fully developed to a point that it's drinkable, and it's not going to taste like grass or very green alfalfa-like flavors. It's going to taste like roasted coffee, but it's going to have character in it that underlies the quality of where it came from and the hands that have produced it, and specifically to the origin from where it came from. And so we have what is called first wave coffee, that diner coffee, and second wave coffee, dark specialty coffee, and now third wave coffee. Well, first wave, second wave, third wave. I just want to catch a wave. The problem with third wave coffee is that a lot of folks, they get kind of snobby about it. Or like me, I get really nerdy about it. And it's not really getting people where they are. I can tell you that one of the most amazing and special things for me is when I introduce somebody to this coffee and they sip it for the first time and the reaction on their face, like, wow, you can't fake it. The feeling that you have, the sensation that you have when you taste coffee that is that good, roasted well, and brewed correctly, does have a unique character that does not remind you of coffee. It reminds you of fruits and vegetables and spices. And that's what I love about specialty coffee. So a little bit of a history lesson. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I want to say that I started with diner coffee, and it wasn't about the coffee that I fell in love with. It was the hospitality of people coming together. And then I enjoyed coffee, and I had some espresso drinks from the folks at Starbucks that introduced me to a new way of thinking about coffee. And then I went to a cafe this is 1993. This was a couple of years ago. And this cafe was brewing specialty coffee that had caramel and chocolate and vanilla and citrus notes. And I was blown away. And I went through all three waves of coffee in a span of just a couple of years. And I would say that don't equate light coffee with poor coffee. Don't think of diner coffee as poor coffee. Don't think of dark coffee as specialty coffee. Think about what it is that you like. What do you enjoy? What does your social engagement bring you joy? And if coffee is the thing that keeps you together, whether it's with your relationships or just functioning in the day, I want you to enjoy it as you go through your day. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to look forward to it. I want you to start your day thinking, man, I'm looking forward to my cup of coffee. And then you end your day like, oh, I'm ready to go tomorrow because I'm going to get started with a great cup of coffee. So, Bridge Coffee Company, we're prepared and ready to make a great cup of coffee.